was so superior to the beliefs, in his beliefs, to the beliefs of society, that the Übermensch was put on earth to provide these beliefs, these ideas, these matters that would be helpful to mankind and would develop over the course of their lives. This was the Nietzschean concept of the Übermensch. But young Nathan, because of his own psychological deficits, misinterpreted this compassionate philosophy and believed he himself was an Übermensch, a Superman. Only once again, because of these deficits, he believed that the Superman was above the morals of society, that he, as an Übermensch or Superman, could in fact kill someone, because the significance of killing someone, well, for Mr. Leopold, it had no more significance than pinning a butterfly on a piece of paper to be observed. And the degree of deliberation, the degree of decision-making that went into it was nothing more than, for Mr. Leopold, than deciding what kind of pie to have for dinner, or whether or not he would have pie for dinner. Such was the thinking of Nathan Leopold. Now, once again, I mentioned to you the distortions in the connections between the frontal lobe and the subcortical parts of the brain. Now, we have found, and our doctors have described to you, the fact that child abuse can lead to what is called pruning, thinning of the neurons. And for that reason, these connections, the ability to make these connections between the frontal lobe, the thinking, planning, what is called executive control, and the lower centers, which is where all the impulses are seething around. These connections cannot be made. The person is absolutely incapable of self-correction of their delusional ideas. You will recall that our doctors spoke about the child abuse that young Nathan was subject to by two different governesses. The first governess, between the ages of 5 and 10, sexually abused young Nathan. She was then followed by a governess who was exactly the opposite, a punitive, harsh individual who implanted in Nathan's young mind images of torture and punishment for impure thoughts. No less abuse than the sexual abuse. As a result, our doctors are of the opinion that Nathan, as brilliant as he was, could not make those connections between the frontal lobe and between the subcortical parts of the brain. And, ladies and gentlemen, what of Richard Loeb? Richard Loeb believed, in an almost delusional sense, that he was the master criminal, somebody who could commit the perfect crime and not be apprehended. Loeb was further described as callous, as unfeeling, as shallow, as unable to experience emotions, as being out of touch with the emotions of others. This is what the doctors have described and what we now call the psychopath. We are also aware that psychopaths have a very slowly developing frontal lobe. The capacity for control that we have in the frontal lobe of most individuals occurs by the time adolescence is over, young adulthood, sometimes into the 20s. The brain, the frontal lobes in the psychopath do not develop until they are in their 40s. This is what the current research shows, which our doctors have described. Therefore, someone like Mr. Loeb, the psychopath, was incapable of exerting any control over these subcortical impulses. He just didn't have the frontal lobe connections to help him do that. Psychopaths, the research shows, also have impairments in what is called the amygdala. The amygdala, small little organ in the subcortical area, which regulates fear and autonomic arousal. Doctors will tell you that psychopaths very frequently describe themselves as fearless. Such individuals will take risks, will be impulsive, and will engage in activities in which other people would be fearful. They experience no fear. Mr. Loeb's history is replete with examples. One time, he took a boat out into Lake Michigan during the midst of a storm. No concerns. Another time, he stole a car with Mr. Leopold in the car and jumped out of the car while it was moving. Things that people with concern for their own safety wouldn't do. And what about the interaction between these two individuals with disturbed brains? We have one who is delusional, believing that he was a Superman and above the mores of society. We have another who, in a same kind of delusional thinking, believed he was the master criminal. What happened when these two individuals got together? It was, ladies and gentlemen, a perfect storm. The confluence of two areas of psychopathology, of neuropsychopathology, which led to this horrendous crime. So in closing, let me say to you, please do not blame these two boys for this crime. Rather, blame their diseased brains and the fact that they were incapable of modulating their behavior. With this in mind, I would ask you to spare their lives.